Ira's my husband left me alone to care for his dying mother. But before she took her last breath, she whispered 7 words that changed my life forever. I still remember the sound of the front door closing. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just one quiet click. But that single sound marked the moment my marriage truly ended. My husband didn't kiss me goodbye. He didn't hug his mother. He didn't even look back. Instead, he wheeled 2 heavy suitcases down the front porch, tossed them into the back of a black SUV, and climbed inside without a second thought. I stood in the doorway, frozen, watching the taillights disappear down our quiet suburban street. Behind me I heard a weak cough. His mother, Margaret, 72 years old, stage 4 cancer, barely able to stand without help. My husband had brought her to our house only 3 days earlier. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said something I'll never forget. "You'll take care of her. You're good at that." As if caring for his dying mother was just another chore to cross off a list. Then he left for what he called a one-year international business assignment. At least, that's what he told me. Back then, I believed him. I had no idea that almost every word out of his mouth had been a lie. And I certainly never imagined that months later, while lying in a hospital bed, Margaret would grab my hand with surprising strength, lean close enough for me to hear her fading voice, and whisper, "Dig under the pickle jar in the kitchen corner." Those 7 words destroyed everything I thought I knew. But before I tell you what I found, you need to understand how I got there. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 36 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. If you had asked anyone who knew me a year ago, they probably would have described me as dependable. Maybe even too dependable. I worked as a freelance graphic designer from home. I liked routines, morning coffee, fresh flowers on the kitchen table, Sunday farmers markets, simple things. I wasn't the kind of woman who enjoyed drama. In fact, I spent most of my life trying to avoid it. My husband, Daniel, was the exact opposite. He loved attention. He loved expensive watches, luxury cars, business dinners, anything that made him look successful. When we first met 8 years earlier, I mistook confidence for kindness. He always knew what to say. He remembered birthdays. He opened doors. He made everyone laugh. Looking back now, I realize he wasn't kind. He was charming. Those are 2 very different things. Charm can disappear the moment nobody is watching. Kindness never does. For years, I ignored the little warning signs. The late-night phone calls he wouldn't answer in front of me. The unexplained business trips. The missing money. The excuses. There was always another explanation, always another promise. And because I loved him, I accepted them. Until the day he brought Margaret home. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Margaret looked so small lying in that bed. Her once dark hair had turned completely silver. The chemotherapy had taken almost everything else. Her strength. Her appetite. Even her voice sounded fragile. Daniel stood beside her bed with his hands in his pockets. He barely spoke to her. Instead, he looked at his watch every few minutes. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mom's being discharged today." I smiled. "I know. The hospice nurse says she shouldn't live alone anymore." "I understand," he nodded. "So she'll stay with us." I looked at Margaret. She seemed embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have to apologize," Daniel interrupted. "I'll be overseas tomorrow." I blinked. "What?" "My company needs me in Singapore." "Tomorrow." It came up suddenly. I stared at him. "You never mentioned this." "I didn't want to worry you." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. "You'll manage." He said it so casually, like he was asking me to water a neighbor's plants. "Daniel, your mother is dying." "I know. You should stay." "I can't." "You won't." His jaw tightened. "This assignment could change our future." Our future. Funny. He said those words while walking away from every responsibility he had. Margaret lowered her eyes. I could tell she wanted to disappear. On the drive home, nobody spoke. The silence was heavier than the oxygen tank sitting between us. The first week was harder than anything I'd ever experienced. Cancer doesn't follow a schedule. Some mornings Margaret could walk into the kitchen on her own. Other days she couldn't lift a spoon. She apologized constantly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm sorry you have to clean this. I'm sorry I'm ruining your life." Every single apology broke my heart, because none of it was her fault. I kept telling her the truth. "You're not ruining anything." And I meant it. She had spent her whole life taking care of other people. Now it was someone else's turn. Mine. The hospice nurse visited every Tuesday and Friday. She taught me how to organize medications, how to recognize signs of pain, how to help Margaret breathe during difficult nights. There were days I felt completely overwhelmed, days I cried in the shower where nobody could hear me. But every time I came back downstairs, Margaret smiled. Even when she was hurting. Especially then. Daniel called every few days. The conversations never lasted longer than 3 minutes. How's mom? She's weaker. Okay. She asked about you. I'm busy. She misses you. I'm sure she understands. Then he'd change the subject. Did the tax documents arrive? Did you pay the insurance? Don't forget the mortgage. Never once did he ask how I was doing. Never once did he say thank you. It was always business. Always money. Always himself. Sometimes I wondered if he even remembered his mother was dying. About 3 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Margaret asked me to sit with her after dinner. The television was off. Rain tapped softly against the windows. She folded her hands together. I owe you an apology. I frowned. For what? For believing my son. I didn't understand. She looked toward the dark window. I always thought he was a good man. You raised him. I did. You loved him. I still do. Her voice trembled. But love doesn't make us blind forever. That sentence stayed with me. Because there was so much sadness behind it. She wasn't defending him anymore. She was grieving the son she thought she'd raised. I should have seen it sooner. Sin what? She looked at me, then shook her head. Nothing. I wanted to ask more. But she changed the subject. That was the first time I realized Margaret was hiding something painful. As the weeks turned into months, our relationship changed. She stopped calling me Emily. She started calling me honey. Sometimes sweetheart. One afternoon she asked me to bring down an old photo album from the attic. We spent hours looking through faded pictures. There was Daniel as a little boy. Missing front teeth. Covered in mud. Laughing while holding a fishing pole almost taller than he was. He wasn't always like this, Margaret whispered. I believe you. He used to cry if he saw injured birds. I looked at the photograph. It was hard to connect that little boy with the man I'd married. What happened? She sighed. I think somewhere along the way money became more important than people. And neither of us spoke for a long time. Outside, children laughed while riding bicycles. Life continued. But inside that living room, it felt like time had stopped. That night I couldn't sleep. Daniel hadn't called in nearly 2 weeks. His social media accounts had gone silent. Every message I sent received the same short reply. Busy. Talk later. Something didn't feel right. Not because I missed him. Because everything seemed too convenient. A sudden overseas assignment, no video calls, no details, no company name, nothing. I opened my laptop. For the first time, I searched for his employer's website. And what I found made my stomach tighten. According to the company's public announcement, there were no international expansion projects that year. No Singapore office. No overseas executive assignments. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe, but for the first time, I seriously wondered if my husband had lied about where he was. I closed the laptop. I didn't tell Margaret. Not yet. Because I needed proof. And I had no idea that the truth was already hiding inside my own house. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. Then I heard Margaret coughing through the baby monitor we'd placed beside her bed. Reality rushed back all at once. I pulled on a sweater, tied my hair into a loose ponytail, and hurried downstairs. Margaret was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked exhausted. You should have called me, I said softly. She managed a weak smile. I didn't want to wake you. I laughed gently. You know that's impossible now. She smiled again, but I could see the pain hiding behind her eyes. I helped her stand, one careful step at a time. Her body had become frighteningly light. Every week she seemed to lose another piece of herself. When we finally reached the kitchen, I made oatmeal while she watched birds gathering around the backyard feeder. They always come together, she whispered. The birds? She nodded. They don't leave the weakest one behind. I stopped stirring the pot. Her words weren't really about birds. They were about Daniel. About family. And about how abandoned she felt. Breakfast had become our favorite part of the day. There were no doctors, no medications, no difficult decisions, just quiet conversation. Sometimes we'd talk about recipes. Sometimes about old movies. Sometimes we'd sit in complete silence. Oddly enough, those silent moments became comforting. I realized something that surprised me. I no longer felt like I was caring for my husband's mother. I felt like I was caring for someone who had become family in her own right. The woman I thought would resent me had become my closest companion. Meanwhile, the man I had married felt farther away every day. Daniel finally called that afternoon. His face didn't appear, just his voice. I'm busy, he said before I could speak. I only have a minute. Margaret had another difficult night. I figured. I waited. Nothing, no concern, no questions, no guilt. I finally asked the question that had been bothering me. How's Singapore? There was a pause, a small one, barely noticeable. But it was there. That was all he said. Hot. No stories, no details, no complaints about the food, no mention of coworkers. Nothing. So, what part of Singapore are you staying in? Another pause. The downtown area. I opened my laptop while we talked. I quietly typed the names of several districts into a search engine. Marina Bay. Silence. Yeah. Lucky you. I heard it's beautiful. It is. Can you show me sometime on video? His answer came too quickly. The internet here is terrible. Singapore, one of the most connected cities in the world. Terrible internet. I almost laughed. Instead, I simply said, okay, I have to go. The call ended. I stared at my phone for several minutes. Something wasn't adding up. Not even close. That evening, after Margaret fell asleep, I opened our shared bank account. Normally, I never look through Daniel's expenses. I trusted him, or at least I used to. Now, I examined every transaction: restaurants, gas stations, coffee shops. Nothing unusual, until I noticed something strange. His credit card had been used only 3 days earlier, in Ohio, less than 20 miles from our house. I checked again. Maybe I had misunderstood. No. The charge clearly listed a local steakhouse. Date, time, amount, everything. My heart started racing. If Daniel was in Singapore, who had used his card? Or worse, if he wasn't overseas, where had he really gone? I didn't sleep much that night. Questions circled through my mind until sunrise. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the company card had been left behind. Maybe a coworker had borrowed it. Maybe. But every explanation sounded weaker than the last. A few days later, the hospice nurse arrived for Margaret's weekly visit. Her name was Karen. She'd worked in hospice care for nearly 20 years. Nothing seemed to surprise her anymore. After checking Margaret's vitals, she pulled me aside. Can we talk privately? My stomach tightened. Of course. We stepped onto the back porch. Karen spoke gently. Margaret's condition is changing. I know. Probably faster than either of us hoped. I looked down at my hands. How much time? She hesitated. I can't promise anything. What? We're probably talking about months. Months. Not years, months. I swallowed hard. Karen placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You're doing an incredible job. I don't always feel like I am. I've seen families disappear when things get difficult. She smiled kindly. You stayed. Those 2 words meant more than she probably realized. Because sometimes, I wasn't sure I was strong enough. That afternoon, Margaret seemed unusually quiet. She barely touched her lunch. Instead, she stared toward the old kitchen cabinets. Finally, she spoke. Emily, Wes, do you know why I kept all those old pickle jars? I laughed. There must be 20 of them. 23. I smiled. I never counted. They're useful. For what? She shrugged. Saving things. I assumed she meant leftovers, buttons, recipes, small household items. I didn't think much about it. Not yet. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret began sharing stories she'd never told me before. Stories about Daniel's childhood. Some were funny. Others, not so much. When Daniel was 12, she said one afternoon, he stole money from my purse. I looked surprised. What happened? He denied it. Did you believe him? At first, she smiled sadly. Then I found the money hidden inside one of his shoes. What did he say? He cried. And admitted it. She slowly shook her head. He cried because he got caught. Not because he felt guilty. That difference hit me hard. Another day she told me about his first job. He convinced another employee to take the blame for missing inventory. I frowned. Seriously. He was only 19. What happened? He got promoted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Every story revealed another piece of the man I thought I knew, a man who had spent years pretending to be someone else. One rainy afternoon, while folding laundry upstairs, I heard the doorbell. When I opened it, a delivery driver stood holding a large envelope. For Daniel Carter, I consign. He handed it over. The return address immediately caught my attention. It wasn't from Singapore. It wasn't international. It had been mailed from Chicago. Inside was a hotel receipt. Luxury suite, 3 nights, 2 guests, 2 guests. My hands started shaking. I checked the dates. They matched the exact week Daniel had claimed he was attending business meetings overseas. There was no explanation anymore. Only lies. I slipped the receipt back into the envelope before Margaret saw it. She already had enough pain. She didn't need to discover her son was deceiving both of us. At least, not until I understood the whole truth. That night I created a folder on my laptop. I named it simply, Daniel Dice. Inside it, I saved everything. Bank statements, receipts, phone records, screenshots, dates, times, patterns. I wasn't trying to prove he was cheating. Not anymore. Something felt much bigger than an affair. It felt planned, calculated, as if he'd carefully removed himself from our lives for a reason. I just didn't know what that reason was yet. One evening, while helping Margaret organize old paperwork, a faded photograph slipped from the pages of an old cookbook. She froze the moment she saw it. Her hands began to tremble. Where did this come from? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the picture as if she'd seen a ghost. It showed Daniel standing beside an older man I had never met. The two of them were smiling outside what looked like a courthouse. On the back, someone had written a single sentence in blue ink. Some promises should never be broken. See, who's that? I asked quietly. Margaret's face turned pale. I hoped I'd never see this again. Who is he? She closed her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Emily. There's something about Daniel Dahl that I've been afraid to tell you. She looked toward the hallway to make sure we were alone. Then she reached for my hand, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. I had never seen fear on Margaret's face before. Not when the doctors confirmed her cancer had spread. Not when the chemotherapy stopped working. Not even when she signed the hospice papers. But now, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, with that old photograph trembling in her hands, she looked terrified. She kept staring toward the hallway, as if she expected someone to walk through the front door, even though we both knew Daniel was supposed to be halfway around the world. Or at least, that's what he wanted us to believe. Emily, she whispered, promise me something. I reached across the table and gently held her hand. Anything. No, she shook her head. I need you to promise before I tell you. Her voice was so serious that it made my heart race. I promise. If anything happens to me, she stopped to catch her breath. Don't believe Daniel. Those words hit me harder than I expected. What do you mean? She looked down at the photograph again, the man standing beside him. She tapped the picture with one trembling finger. His name was Richard Hale. I've never heard of him. I wish I hadn't either. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, gathering what little strength she had left. When Daniel graduated from college, Richard offered him a job. What kind of job? He said it was financial consulting, but it wasn't. She slowly shook her head. Richard never did honest business. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What did he actually do? Margaret hesitated. He found lonely elderly people. I frowned. I don't understand. He convinced them to invest their life savings. My chest tightened. And then, they lost everything. The room fell silent. Daniel knew. Another slow nod. At first, I believed he was just answering phones. But he became Richard's favorite employee. I could barely process what I was hearing. The money, Margaret whispered, changed him. She wiped away a tear. I confronted him once. What happened? He told me everyone lies to get ahead. I stared at her. He actually said that. He smiled while saying it. The words sent chills through me. That wasn't the Daniel I thought I'd married. Or maybe, it had always been him. I had simply refused to see it. Margaret reached for her tea, but her hands shook so badly I picked up the cup for her. She smiled weakly. Thank you. You don't have to thank me.
Oh, I do.
No. I smiled. You've thanked me enough for a lifetime. For a moment, we both laughed. A quiet, tired laugh. It was one of the last peaceful moments we'd ever share. That evening, after helping Margaret into bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Richard Hale. The name meant nothing to me, so I opened my laptop. I searched every combination I could think of. Richard Hale, Ohio. Richard Hale investment fraud. The first several results were ordinary. Then, one article caught my attention. As local financial advisor sentenced for fraud scheme. As I clicked it, the article was nearly 15 years old. Richard Hale had been convicted of stealing millions of dollars from retired couples. He'd promised safe investments. Instead, he'd transferred their savings into fake companies. Dozens of families had lost everything. Some had even lost their homes. According to the article, Richard had died in prison several years later. I kept reading. One sentence made my blood run cold. Authorities believe additional associates were involved, though insufficient evidence prevented further charges. See associates. Was Daniel one of them? I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, everything looked different. His obsession with money, his constant lies, his secretive behavior. It wasn't random, it was learned. The next morning, Margaret seemed unusually energetic. She insisted on helping me make breakfast. You should stay in bed, I said. I've stayed in bed enough. She slowly peeled apples while I mixed pancake batter. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee. For a little while, life almost felt normal. Then she suddenly stopped cutting. Her knife rested on the cutting board. She stared toward the far corner of the kitchen, the pickle jars. I looked where she was looking. Dozens of old glass jars sat neatly on a wooden shelf. Most were empty. A few still held homemade pickles from years ago. What about them? She seemed to catch herself. Oh, nothing. She forced a smile. But it wasn't convincing. Not at all. That afternoon, someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a man in his early 50s stood on the porch. He wore a brown delivery uniform. "I have a certified letter for Daniel Carter." My heart skipped. He's out of town. The man checked his clipboard. "Can you sign?" I hesitated, then nodded. As soon as he drove away, I looked at the envelope. The return address belonged to a law office. Inside was a notice. Final demand before legal action. As I quickly read through the letter, it referenced unpaid business obligations, outstanding debts, missed deadlines, and one sentence that immediately caught my attention. "Our investigators have been unable to verify your client's reported overseas residence." I read it twice. Then a third time. They couldn't verify he was overseas either, so I wasn't imagining things. Other people were looking for him. I carefully placed the letter inside the growing folder on my laptop desk. The folder labeled, "Sex Daniel." Sear every day it became thicker. Receipts, bank statements, legal notices, strange phone numbers. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. My husband hadn't disappeared by accident, he had disappeared on purpose. But why? Late that night my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I ignored those calls. Something told me not to. Silence, then a woman's voice. Soft, confident. "Are you Emily?" "Yes." "I'm sorry." "For what?" A pause. "You deserve to know the truth." My heart pounded. "Who is this?" "You won't believe me. Try me." Another silence. Then she said 6 words that changed everything. "I'm living with your husband." I couldn't breathe. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally I whispered, "Who are you?" "My name is Vanessa." "How did you get my number?" He left his phone unlocked. I closed my eyes. "So, the business trip?" "There isn't one." I already knew, but hearing someone else confirm it felt like being punched in the chest. "Where is he?" "I can't tell you." "Why?" "Because if he finds out," I called. Her voice cracked. "He'll ruin my life too." Before I could ask another question, the line went dead. I sat in the dark living room until nearly dawn. Oddly enough, I didn't cry. I thought I would. Instead, I felt something else, relief. Because uncertainty was finally disappearing. The lies were becoming facts. The puzzle pieces were fitting together. And once you know someone is lying, you stop questioning yourself. You start questioning them. The following afternoon, Margaret asked me to help her into the backyard. She wanted to sit beneath the old maple tree. The weather was perfect, a cool blue sky. Birds singing overhead. She closed her eyes. "I used to bring Daniel out here when he was little." I stayed quiet. "He loved climbing trees." She smiled sadly. "He was fearless." Then her spelling myself heated. "Come back." I looked at her. "I don't think he will." "I know." She nodded. "I just hoped." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I hoped I was wrong." I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. For several minutes we simply watched the wind move through the leaves. Then she reached into the pocket of her sweater. She pulled out a small brass key, old, scratched, worn smooth with age. She placed it in my hand. "Keep this." "What does it open?" "You'll know." "I don't understand." "You will." Before I could ask another question, Margaret suddenly gasped. Her hand flew to her chest. The color drained from her face. "Margaret." She tried to answer. No words came out. Her body slumped sideways in the chair. I caught her before she hit the ground. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. 911. "What's your emergency?" "My mother-in-law, she collapsed. She's not responding." Within minutes, sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Paramedics rushed into the yard. They worked quickly, checking her pulse, giving oxygen, loading her onto a stretcher. As they rolled her toward the ambulance, Margaret's eyes opened for just a second. She searched the crowd until she found me. Then, with almost no strength left, she whispered, "Don't trust Daniel." The ambulance doors slammed shut, the sirens wailed, and I stood alone in the driveway, holding the tiny brass key that she had placed in my hand only moments before. The emergency room was unnaturally quiet. Machines beeped in steady rhythms. Nurses hurried past with practiced urgency. Doctors spoke in calm voices that somehow made everything feel even more serious. I sat alone in a stiff plastic chair, staring at the small brass key resting in my palm. Margaret had given it to me only minutes before she collapsed. I turned it over again and again. It wasn't a house key. It wasn't a car key. It was much smaller, almost like the kind used for an old lockbox or a safe deposit box. I slipped it into my jacket pocket just as a doctor approached. His expression told me the news before he said a single word. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Quiet, gentle, final. My throat tightened. "We did everything we could." I nodded slowly. I wanted to say something. Anything. But nothing came out. A nurse led me into Margaret's room. She looked peaceful. For the first time in months, she wasn't in pain. I sat beside her bed and gently held her hand. It was already growing cold. "I'm sorry." I whispered. I'm so sorry. Tears finally came, not because she was my husband's mother, but because somewhere along the way, she had become the family I never expected to find. As I sat there, remembering everything we'd shared, I felt her fingers move. Barely. I froze. Her eyes opened just a fraction. The nurse had stepped outside. We were alone. Margaret looked directly at me. With every bit of strength she had left, she pulled me closer. Her lips trembled. Then she whispered 7 words that would change my life forever. Dig under the pickle jar in the kitchen corner. I leaned closer. What? She tried to repeat herself, but no sound came out. A tiny smile crossed her face. Then, she took one final breath, and she was gone. The funeral took place 3 days later. Daniel never came. He sent flowers, white lilies. Attached to them was a printed sympathy card, not handwritten, printed. It simply read, "Sorry for your loss. Sorry, Mom. Noms. I wish I could be there. Sorry for your loss." I stared at the card for a long time, then I threw it in the trash. Several neighbors attended. So did Karen, the hospice nurse. She hugged me tightly. "You gave her peace." "I hope so." "I know so." Those words stayed with me. Because for the first time since Margaret died, I felt that maybe I'd done something right. That evening I returned to the now painfully quiet house. Everything reminded me of her. The blanket folded over her favorite chair. Her reading glasses beside the lamp. The half-finished crossword puzzle still lying on the coffee table. The silence felt overwhelming. Then, I remembered her final words. Dig under the pickle jar in the kitchen corner. I walked slowly into the kitchen. For a moment I simply stood there. The wooden shelf still held dozens of old glass pickle jars. Exactly as she'd left them. Most were dusty. Some were empty. One sat alone in the far corner. Unlike the others, it was much heavier. I picked it up. There were no pickles inside, only dried beans. Strange. Why would someone store beans in a pickle jar? Then I noticed something else. The jar had left a perfect circle in the dust. As I lifted it away, I saw a loose floor tile beneath it. My heart began to race. The tile moved easily. Someone had lifted it many times before. Underneath was a small metal box, old, rusty, locked. My hands shook as I pulled it free. Then I remembered the brass key. I reached into my pocket. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open. Inside the box were several neatly wrapped envelopes, a small notebook, a flash drive, and a thick stack of legal documents. At the very top, a handwritten note. My name was written across the front. Emily. I carefully unfolded the paper. Margaret's handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. As Emily. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it also means I finally found the courage to tell you the truth. First, thank you. You loved me when my own son abandoned me. You treated me with more kindness in 1 year than I deserved after the mistakes I made raising Daniel. I'm sorry I stayed silent for so long. I hoped he would change. He never did. Everything inside this box belongs to you now. Sit wisely. And don't let him destroy another life. By the time I reached the end of the letter, I was crying so hard I could barely see the page. I wiped away my tears and opened the notebook. It wasn't a diary, it was a record. Page after page, dates, names, addresses, amounts of money. Every entry described one of Daniel's schemes: fake investments, forged signatures, hidden accounts, cash payments. There were notes written in the margins. Sick. Poor couple lost retirement savings. Sit. Richard handled paperwork. Daniel collected cash. My stomach turned. Margaret hadn't been keeping memories. She had been collecting evidence for years. The flash drive contained scanned documents, contracts, bank transfers, photos. One folder immediately caught my attention. Say insurance. Inside were copies of life insurance policies. Mine, Margaret's, Daniel's. I opened Margaret's first. Daniel was listed as the primary beneficiary. Nothing unusual. Then I opened mine. I froze. I hadn't remembered signing a policy this large. $2 million. Primary beneficiary Daniel Carter. My blood ran cold. I clicked through the application documents. One signature looked like mine, but it wasn't. Someone had forged it. I felt sick. I read every page again. The policy had been created only 4 months earlier. Exactly 1 week before Daniel left on his so-called business trip. Suddenly everything made terrifying sense. He hadn't simply abandoned us. He had been preparing something: the fake trip, the disappearing act, the forged documents, the insurance. It wasn't just deception. It was planning, careful, deliberate, dangerous. Near the bottom of the box sat one final envelope. Across the front Margaret had written, "Sess, only if Daniel comes back." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was another letter, short, direct. "Emily, if Daniel returns after my death, do not tell him you found this box. He believes I destroyed everything. If let him keep believing that. Take copies of every document. Find a lawyer. Then go to Detective Michael Lawson. He was the only officer who ever believed Richard Hale had help. He'll know what to do. I trust him. Not my son. I read the last sentence 3 times. Not my son. Those 3 words broke my heart more than anything else. A mother had spent the final months of her life preparing evidence against her own child. No parent ever dreams of doing something like that. I looked around the quiet kitchen. Everything suddenly felt different. This wasn't just an old family secret anymore. This was enough evidence to destroy Daniel's entire life. If it was real. I took a deep breath. One decision could change everything. I carefully scanned every document into my computer, made 3 backup copies, stored the flash drive in a separate location, and locked the originals inside a fireproof safe. Only then did I allow myself to think. There was one question I still couldn't answer. If Daniel had gone to such incredible lengths to disappear, why hadn't he come back to collect the box himself? Unless he truly believed Margaret had already destroyed it. Which meant he had no idea that his dying mother had trusted me instead of him. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I had the truth. I had the evidence. And soon, Daniel would have no idea what was waiting for him. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more.